Let's go through the next stanza. Yet stop I did. In fact, I often do, and always end much at a loss like this. Wondering what to look for, wondering, too, when churches will fall completely out of use, what we shall turn them into. If we shall keep a few cathedrals chronically on show, their parchment plate in picks in locked cases, and let the rest rent free to rain and sheep, shall we avoid them as unlucky places? So, in the previous stanza, where he was reflecting that this place, that is the church which he had visited, is not worth stopping for. But then in this stanza he says, Yet stop I do. So, like a typical modern man, the forces which are within him at conflict all the time, whether to have hope in religion or whether to be hopeless about religion, whether to have faith in religion or to be a faithless person. So this conflict, it sometimes makes him wonder what's the use of going to the church, and sometimes it's make him think that he should go to the church. So he says, Jet stop I did. In fact, I often do. In fact, he says that I often go to church and always end much at a loss like this. So, whenever he goes to the church, he ends up in the same kind of confused state of mind as he is now. And he wonders what to look for in the church. And he wonders that what will happen when the church will be completely out of use, when nobody is going to go to the church, when there will be no sermons conducted in the church. Then what are we going to do with the churches? What are we going to change the buildings into? The cathedrals that will remain, the few cathedrals, are we going to make them a chronicle? Are we going to change them into a museum? For some people who will go and visit and see that what religion was, who will go and see these religious relics, the parchment, the plate, and the pyx kept in the locked cases. People will go and visit and see that some time back these religious relics had some spiritual value. So they would try to quench their thirst of knowledge of religious history. And then he goes on to again brood over this fact that if some of them will be kept as chronicles, as museums, what about the remaining? Would we just leave them for the sheep so that the sheep graze in them? And should we just transform them into barns? Because when naturally nobody is going to visit them, so these buildings will be transformed into barns where cattle would graze. Shall we, or then he goes on to pose another question, shall we avoid them as unlucky places? Would they be avoided by people? People would consider them as unlucky places. People would start cherishing superstitious beliefs related to these buildings. Or after dark, will dubious women come to make their children touch a particular stone, pick simples for a cancer, or on some advised night see walking a dead one? Power of some sort will go on in games, in riddles, seemingly at random. But superstition, like belief, must die. And what remains when disbelief is gone? Grass, weedy pavement, brambles, buttress, sky. So, in this stanza, in these few lines, he is wondering that what will happen to the churches when they are no more in use, and carrying on the same superstitious belief from the last stanza, that would people start thinking them as unlucky places. He goes on to say that probably in dark, some dubious women, they would bring their children to touch particular stones, that is the religious relics that are there, which are considered as something holy, which have some uh, remedies, some cures attached to them. So probably women would bring their children to touch those stones to cure themselves, or would they become such places where ghosts visit during the night time. So he is trying to ponder over the usage of church, that what will happen when people would stop going to the churches. As he has already told us, the church that he has visited has an unignorable kind of silence prevailing in it, where the echoes they snigger at him, where the flowers have gone stale. So, in such a church, which is no more being visited by people, so he says that with the passage of time, this number is going to reduce, and a time will come when different kind of superstitious beliefs will be attached to these churches. And then he says that this superstition, he says, if for example, if that also dies, like the belief, like the faith that people had initially in churches, if it has dwindled with the passage of time, similarly superstition will also go away after some time. Then what will become? What will these churches reduce to? They will become grass, weedy pavement, brambles, buttress, sky. So they will, by the use of these words, he is trying to imply here that the building which held intact in it religious beliefs, which held intact in it the religious rituals, the customs and the traditions related to religion, which were being followed by people, this building will lose its identity, will become like like some unidentifiable building, due to the overgrowth of grass, due to the pavements which would have weeds overgrown over them, due to the bushes, due to the roofless buildings. So he says that this is what is going to happen to the churches. And here again, we see that Philip Larkin is being hopeless here as far as the importance of churches is concerned. He is pondering over the situation of the churches, what churches have become due to a godless and a faithless kind of a society. People are now no more hopeful about the presence of God, about the benevolence of God. And because Philip Larkin was living in the times when he had heard about the First World War, because he was born in 1922, long after the First World War had ended, and he had been a witness of the Second World War himself. So, in such a scenario, the society that was before him, the people that he got mingled with, this all social scenario, it made him think in the same lines as the other people were. And here in this poem, he emerges as an agnostic, thinking about the uselessness, thinking about the futility of going to churches. So here he now moves on to another stanza, and the grass and the weedy pavement, brambles, buttress, and sky, which had overpowered the church, now they change the church into a shape less recognizable each week, a purpose more obscure. I wonder who will be the last, the very last, to seek this place for what it was, one of the crew that tap and jot and know what rude lofts were, some ruined bibber randy for antique, or Christmas addict counting on a whiff of gown and bands and organ pipes and myrrh. Or will he be my representative? So, with the passage of time and, and due to lack of attendance in churches, the church would lose its identity. It would lose its purpose. It would become a purpose which would be obscure, unidentifiable. And he says that he, he wonders here now that who will be the last to come to this place. Would he be one of the crew who looks after the church, who knows that, or who is able to tell that what this part of the ruined building of the church stood for? He would be probably the last one, or some ruined bibber uh, who, due to his interest in antique, would come to see that what this antique building stood for. Or would he be a person coming to find out that what kind of ceremonies were conducted in this church? A Christmas addict who probably would come to find out that what kind of ceremonies and what kind of festivities related to Christmas were celebrated in this ruined building. Or will he be my representative? So after giving us so many examples and telling us that who would be the last person to come to this building, he then goes on to say that would he be my representative? Bored, uninformed, knowing the ghostly silt dispersed, yet tending to this cross of ground through suburb scrub because it held uns- unspilled so long and equably what since is found only in separation, marriage and birth and death and thoughts of these, for which was built this special shell. For though I have no idea what this accoutred frosty barn is worth, it pleases me to stand in silence here. So now he defines himself. The person he wonders who is going to be the last one to come to this church would be his representative, a representative modern 20th century man who is bored, who is uninformed, and who knows that this costly silt dispersed. So now the church, it becomes the building of the church, which first he transforms it into a museum, then he goes on to transform it into a barn, and then into grass and weedy pavement, and then a shape which is less recognizable, and now finally he calls it a ghostly silt which has dispersed and yet tending to this cross of ground. So he knows that this church, which used to be a very important part, which used to be a focal point of the society, has now dispersed like ghostly silt. Even then, this representative modern man is going to tend to this cross of ground. Now he reduces that huge cathedral, that huge building of a church to a cross of ground, which has dispersed like a ghost and is now there in the suburbs of the city. This again is very important here because the church, which used to be the focal point, which used to be the center, which used to be the guiding principle of the society, all the monarchs in the history of English literature, they had consulted church and they had taken guidance from the church. So such an important part and parcel of the society has now been shifted from the center of the society to the suburbs of the society. And this is very symbolic here because this tells us that how the role of religion has distanced from the society. People who used to seek religion for relief, who used to seek religion for guidance, for spiritual strength, for forgiveness, now religion is no more a part of their lives. It's something at a distance, far away. And this is what he says here, that though the modern man who is bored and uninformed, he will still tend to this cross of ground, which though is in the suburbs of the city, but which holds in it unspoiled so long and equably what sense is found only in separation, marriage, and birth and death. So, for what for, is this modern man going to be drawn towards this ghostly celt? For three important aspects of a human life: marriage, birth, and death. These all three, which are decided by fate. We don't have any choice in them. To which family we are born, to whom we are going to get married, and what is the time of our death. This is what has been decided by fate. So, for these three, because these three also carry with them ceremonies to be conducted in churches. A birth is related to baptism of a baby. Marriage is consummated, or marriage is solemnized, not consummated. Marriage is solemnized in a church. Death, the last rituals of death, they are also conducted in a church. So he says that for these three is this special shell built. This special shell, that is the church. And for though I have no idea what this accoutred frosty barn is worth, it pleases me to stand in silence here. So he says, for this I stand in silence over here. Probably these are the aspects of life which drive me towards it, and due to these I gravitate towards this shell, this barn, this cathedral, this museum, and this unrecognizable shape. So for these I still stand in silence and I still keep on coming to this place. And in the final stanza now, he goes on to say this church, a serious house on serious earth, it is, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, are recognized and robed as destinies, and that much never can be obsolete. Since someone will forever be surprising a hunger in himself to be more serious and gravitating with it to this ground, which he once heard was proper to grow wise in, if only that so many dead lie round. So he goes on to say that this house is a serious house. He goes on to call this church as something serious. And why he calls it serious? Because, as in the previous stanza, he had talked about the three important aspects of human life: birth, marriage, and death. These are where our compulsions meet, and they are recognized and robed as destinies. They are our destinies, they are our fate. And no matter what we do, no matter what our disbeliefs are, even if we turn into an agnostic, these three important functions of our life will remain. And he says that for that matter, this church can never become obsolete. And there will be someone somewhere who will come to this piece of land, that is this church, and who will be gravitating, will be attracted towards this piece of land to find out what this building holds in it. And looking around him, when he'll see the graveyard, when he will see the tombstones, that will make him think that this is a serious house on serious earth. So basically, what Philip Larkin is trying to tell us here is that no matter what our beliefs are, no matter we become agnostic in our beliefs, no matter we, being modern men, are far away from a religion, there are still some important aspects related to religion which will keep us driving towards it, which will keep us attracted towards it, even if we are driven away from it, even if the attendance in churches becomes less and less with the passage of time, even if modern man becomes so occupied in his daily activities that he does not get time to go to the church, even then, church and the role of the church will never completely vanish away from the society, because these three aspects, which we call as destinies, which we call as fate, will push us into going to the church. And then the graveyard around the church, it is going to give us wisdom.